The story of the time machine begins in the quiet, dimly lit study of an inventor whose dreams stretch beyond the confines of his own era. This man, known only as the time traveler, is a visionary, a scientist whose intellect and curiosity have driven him to explore the boundaries of what is possible. His theories about time have captivated and perplexed his colleagues, a small circle of skeptical minds who gather in his home, sharing lively debates and listening to his astonishing claims. But tonight is different. As his guests settle into their seats, the time traveler appears before them, visibly shaken and filled with an urgency that none of them can quite explain. He is no longer speaking in the abstract language of theory. He has, he insists, traveled through time. His eyes shine with a blend of awe and trepidation, his voice carrying the weight of wonders and horrors he can barely begin to describe. "I tell you," he says, voice trembling, "I have seen the future. I have journeyed to places and times beyond our wildest dreams, and I have returned to tell you what lies ahead." His guests exchange skeptical glances, amusement flickering across their faces. Yet, they cannot deny the intensity of his gaze or the conviction in his words. Slowly, the room falls silent, and they lean forward, unable to resist the allure of the unknown. As they listen, he begins to recount the creation of his greatest invention, the time machine itself. With its sleek, gleaming metal framework and levers poised for action, the machine is unlike anything they have ever seen. Its polished surface reflects the firelight, casting shadows that seem to dance with the promise of untold journeys. The time traveler explains how he has constructed this machine based on his belief that time is not an unchangeable sequence but a dimension, like space, that one can traverse with the right device. His machine is no mere gadget. It is a vessel designed to break through the fabric of reality itself. To the time traveler, this invention is more than a scientific breakthrough. It is a key to unlocking the future of humankind, a chance to see how far civilization will reach, and, perhaps, what perils await. He knows that his quest is not without risk, but his curiosity overrides his caution. The allure of stepping beyond the present moment, beyond the bounds of his own lifetime, is irresistible. As he begins his journey, the world around him blurs, the hands of his clock spinning faster and faster, day shifting into night and back again in a flicker of motion. He watches in wonder as seasons change in an instant, as buildings rise and fall, as nature itself transforms at a pace that defies comprehension. Time, the immovable force that has held humanity in place for millennia, is now bending to his will. But the time traveler's vision of the future is not merely one of progress. As he accelerates further, leaving behind his own century, his optimism mingles with apprehension. What will he find at the end of this journey? Will he see the flourishing of humanity or its decline? The landscape morphs, the skies darken, and a strange, alien world begins to unfold before him. And so, with each passing moment, he moves forward through time, not knowing what lies ahead, but driven by an insatiable hunger to understand the mysteries of the universe. His journey will take him beyond the familiar comforts of Victorian England, beyond the world as he knows it, into realms that defy his understanding and challenge everything he believes. The guests in his study listen in rapt silence, the gravity of his tale sinking in. For the time traveler, this is not just a story but a warning, an invitation to peer into the mysteries of existence and ponder the fate of humankind. With each word, he draws them, and us, into a story that transcends the limits of the present, propelling us toward a future that is both wondrous and terrifying. This is the tale of the Time Machine, a journey into the heart of time itself, where past and future collide, and where humanity's destiny hangs in the balance. Chapter 1: The Invention of the Time Machine. In a dimly lit room lined with shelves of books and scientific instruments, the time traveler stood before his guests with an intense look in his eyes. He had gathered them, this small group of academics, doctors, and curious minds, on this particular evening to share something extraordinary. They were used to his theories, his eccentric experiments, and his relentless curiosity. But tonight, there was something different in his manner. He was not merely proposing a hypothesis or testing a new theory. He was about to reveal the fruits of a daring and dangerous ambition. The time traveler cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Gentlemen," he began, "I have spent years researching the nature of time, not as a fixed and immutable force, but as something flexible, navigable, like the dimensions of space." His guests exchanged puzzled glances, intrigued but unconvinced. They had listened to him speak of time as the fourth dimension before, a concept that felt more like a thought experiment than a reality. But tonight, his conviction was different. Solid, unshakable. He gestured toward a large, gleaming device positioned in the center of the room. It was unlike any machine they had ever seen, a strange contraption of polished metal, levers, and crystalline dials. Its design was intricate, a blend of elegant craftsmanship and meticulous engineering. At first glance, it looked almost ornamental, with a brass framework and intricate gears that shimmered in the candlelight. But as they studied it more closely, they could see it was no mere decoration. It was a device built with precision and purpose. "This, gentlemen, is my time machine," he announced, a glint of pride in his eyes. "It is capable of traversing time just as a ship travels through water. With this, I can move forward or backward, stepping out of the present and into the past or future." The room fell silent, each guest studying the machine with a mixture of wonder and doubt. Dr. Haldane, a doctor known for his pragmatic outlook, raised an eyebrow. "Surely you don't expect us to believe that this machine could truly take you into the future?" he asked, his tone both skeptical and amused. The time traveler met Dr. Haldane's gaze with an unwavering intensity. "I do expect you to believe it," he replied, "because I have already tested it myself. I have taken small journeys, seconds into the future, then minutes, each time pushing further to ensure its accuracy and safety." He pointed to a small lever on the machine, explaining how it controlled the direction of travel, and to a dial that displayed the precise date and time of his destination. "But this is no parlor trick," he continued. "It is a scientific breakthrough that holds the potential to unlock the secrets of human progress, to reveal what awaits us as a civilization. The only question is how far into the future I dare to go." The time traveler's audience sat in stunned silence, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what he was claiming. To travel through time was a concept they had only considered in theory, in the realm of fiction. But here, standing before them, was a machine that seemed to defy every law of reality they knew. It was both thrilling and unsettling. One of the guests, a historian, leaned forward, captivated. "If you can truly move through time, what will you look for?" he asked. "Will you visit great civilizations, observe our advancements, or witness our decline?" The time traveler paused, contemplating the question. "I aim to see humanity's future," he replied, his voice filled with a sense of wonder. To observe our progress, our achievements, and perhaps our mistakes. I want to know if we continue to rise, if we become a wiser, more enlightened society, or if there are dangers we have yet to realize. He explained how he had meticulously constructed the time machine, designing every detail from scratch. His work had been solitary, consuming his days and nights as he sought to master the complex mechanics and the intricate theories behind it. The machine had become his obsession, a quest to defy the limitations of his own era and to experience the marvels that lay beyond. But as he spoke of the machine's potential, a shadow passed over his face. The future is an unknown territory, he said, more to himself than to his audience. There may be wonders there, but there may also be dangers. If I venture too far, I may see things that cannot be unseen, things that challenge what I believe humanity is capable of. The guests, now fully invested, exchanged murmurs of excitement and unease. The machine before them was more than just an invention. It was a doorway to knowledge, a chance to see the outcome of human endeavor and ambition. Yet they understood that such knowledge came with a price. To see the future was to confront the unknown, and with it, the possibility of darkness as well as light. The time traveler moved to the machine, his hand hovering over the lever. "Tomorrow I will take a journey further than I have ever dared before," he said, his tone filled with resolve. "I will go forward in time beyond my own lifetime, perhaps beyond even the bounds of recorded history, to discover what awaits us." As he spoke, his eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery, but also with a touch of fear. For while he was driven by curiosity, he knew that time was an unforgiving force, one that might reveal more than he was prepared to face. His guests could only watch in awe, sensing that this journey would be unlike any the world had ever known. A journey not just into the future, but into the depths of what it means to be human. And so, as the candles flickered and the shadows deepened, the time traveler prepared to embark on a journey that would defy imagination and uncover secrets buried in the heart of time itself. Chapter 2. The Journey Begins. A Leap into the Future. The time traveler, seated in the polished metal frame of his machine, took a deep breath and adjusted his grip on the lever. The room around him was silent, save for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. With a glance at the array of dials and gears, he steadied his mind, reminding himself that this was not merely an experiment. It was an exploration into the very fabric of reality. Tonight, he would push further into the future than he ever had before, beyond the limits of his own lifetime and into the mysteries that lay ahead. His fingers tightened on the lever, and with a swift movement he pushed it forward. Instantly, a strange sensation overtook him, as though the room itself was dissolving. He felt a powerful acceleration, a disorienting blur, and an intense pressure that seemed to surround him. The world outside the machine's frame shifted and distorted, becoming a cascade of colors and light, moving at an impossible speed. Day turned to night and back again in a matter of seconds, the hands of his clock spinning wildly as time raced past him. The time traveler watched in awe as the landscape around him began to change. Familiar buildings rose and fell with astonishing speed, replaced by new structures that grew, decayed, and vanished, all in the blink of an eye. Trees shot up from the ground like green pillars, only to wither and collapse, their remains swept away by the winds of time. Seasons cycled in rapid succession. The warmth of summer was replaced by the chill of winter, only to bloom into spring again moments later. The world was alive and evolving, and he was witnessing it all from the confines of his machine. As he moved faster through the years, the world's transformation grew even stranger. The cityscape of his era began to dissolve, replaced by unfamiliar forms of architecture, structures taller and more elaborate than any he had seen before. Yet, even these marvels seemed fleeting, rising in an instant before vanishing into rubble and dust. The time traveler could hardly believe what he was seeing. Civilizations were emerging and disappearing, entire eras passing like sand slipping through an hourglass. He felt a peculiar blend of exhilaration and apprehension as he continued to accelerate, pushing himself further and further into the future. Each second brought him farther from his own time, yet he was determined to see what lay at the end of this journey. As he moved beyond his own century, the changes grew more profound. The cities of man began to fade, replaced by sprawling stretches of nature reclaiming the land. Rivers altered their courses, mountains appeared and disappeared on the horizon, and the landscape became increasingly alien with every moment. After what felt like an eternity, he began to slow the machine, bringing it to a gentle halt. The world outside his frame settled into focus, and the blur of color gave way to a strange and silent landscape. The air was still, carrying a scent of unfamiliar plants and earth. Slowly, he stepped out of the machine, his eyes scanning the environment around him. He had arrived in a future far removed from his own time, a world transformed by both the passage of time and the hand of nature. Before him lay a gentle, rolling landscape covered in lush greenery. A tranquil river wound its way through the valley, shimmering in the pale sunlight. But there was something unsettling about the scene, an eerie calm that seemed to permeate the air. The world was beautiful, yes, but it was also strangely empty, devoid of the sounds of industry and the bustle of human life. There were no buildings, no signs of the society he had known. This was a world that seemed to have grown past humanity's presence, a world that had returned to an earlier, simpler state. As he ventured further, he encountered small clusters of beings moving through the meadows. They were humanoid in form, but smaller, delicate, and ethereal, with features that seemed almost childlike. Their clothes were simple, draped in soft fabrics, and they moved with a languid grace, their faces serene and expressionless. These were the Eloi, the future descendants of humankind. The time traveler observed them with fascination. They appeared peaceful, gentle, and content, yet there was something almost passive about them. Their eyes held no curiosity, no spark of ambition or intelligence. They laughed and played among the flowers, basking in the sunlight, but there was a vacancy in their expressions that troubled him. He approached them, attempting to communicate, but they showed little interest in his questions. They understood him, yet they seemed disinterested in him or his machine. For the Eloi, existence was simple and idyllic, a life without struggle, without hunger, without want. As he spent more time among them, he began to realize that these beings represented a strange and unsettling evolution. The advancements of humankind, the ambitions that had driven civilization forward, seemed to have vanished from their world. They had everything they needed, yet they lacked something vital: the drive to learn, to question, to progress. Humanity had changed, evolving into a form that was beautiful and peaceful, but devoid of the spark that had once defined it. The time traveler's initial wonder gave way to a quiet dread. This was not the future he had imagined, not a utopia of progress, but a world that had abandoned ambition and curiosity. And as night fell over the valley, he noticed a shift in the Eloi's behavior. Their serene expressions turned to fear, and they hurried indoors, locking themselves away from the darkness. The time traveler was left alone, standing in the growing shadows, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The stars appeared in the sky, cold and distant, and a strange rustling sound came from the trees behind him. He sensed movement in the darkness, an eerie, silent presence that seemed to watch him from the cover of night. He would soon learn that the Eloi were not alone on this strange earth, and that beneath the surface of this peaceful world lay secrets darker than he could have imagined. Chapter 3. The World of the Eloi. The days that followed were marked by a strange mixture of curiosity and unease. The time traveler wandered among the Eloi, observing their tranquil lives and their odd customs. They lived in harmony with the land, their existence seemingly free of work, conflict, or desire. Their society was simple, almost childlike, and their every day was filled with laughter and leisure as they roamed the fields and gathered in groups to play by the river. Yet, despite their idyllic surroundings, the time traveler sensed something profoundly unsettling beneath the surface. The Eloi themselves were as gentle as the world they inhabited. Their skin was pale and smooth, their movements graceful and unhurried. They appeared neither young nor old, existing in a state of perpetual, almost dreamlike calm. They spoke little, their language a soft, musical murmur that seemed to lack depth or complexity. The time traveler tried to communicate with them, asking questions, sharing stories of his own world, but his words seemed to mean little to them. They regarded him with polite indifference, as though he were merely another curious figure in the landscape. Over time, the time traveler began to understand that the Eloi lived without struggle or hardship. Food grew plentifully in the fields, and they had no need for industry or technology. Their homes were simple, open structures that blended seamlessly with their natural surroundings. There were no walls, no barriers, and no tools of any kind. Life for the Eloi was easy and undemanding, a world without labor, suffering, or even ambition. Yet, in their eyes, he saw a profound lack of curiosity, an emptiness that troubled him deeply. He soon realized that their minds had grown as passive as their environment. With no challenges to stimulate them, the Eloi had lost their drive for knowledge and growth. They had forgotten even the basic skills of survival, living only to eat, play, and sleep, content to drift through life without questioning the world around them. This realization filled the time traveler with a sense of sorrow, as he saw in them the remnants of human civilization, a society that had once achieved greatness but had now faded into complacency. As he explored further, he noticed that the Eloi exhibited a strange fear whenever night began to fall. At dusk, their carefree demeanor shifted, and they would glance nervously at the shadows, hurrying indoors to avoid the darkness. Their laughter ceased, replaced by an uneasy silence, and they gathered together in their dwellings, huddled close as if hiding from some unseen threat. One evening, intrigued by their behavior, the time traveler decided to stay outside as darkness settled over the land. The Eloi tried to persuade him to come inside, their faces filled with an expression he hadn't seen before: fear. He gently declined, choosing instead to watch from a distance as the last light faded and the valley fell into deep shadow. He sat alone by the river, listening to the sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the faint calls of nocturnal creatures, and an unsettling silence that hung heavily in the air. It was then that he sensed something moving in the darkness. A low, guttural sound drifted from the edge of the trees, and he saw vague shapes shifting in the shadows. His heart pounded as he strained to see what lurked beyond the reach of his vision. Slowly, from the depths of the night, a figure emerged, pale, hunched, and unnervingly silent. The creature's skin was ashen, its eyes glinting with a cold, predatory intelligence. This was no Eloi. It was something darker, something born of the earth's hidden depths. The time traveler realized with a chill that these were the Morlocks, a subterranean race that dwelled in the darkness beneath the world of the Eloi. Their movements were swift and unsettling. Their eyes adapted to the gloom, and they prowled the surface only when night had fallen, lurking in the shadows like creatures of nightmare. The Morlocks lived in the underground tunnels, where the time traveler could now see faint, eerie lights glimmering in the distance. He watched in horrified fascination as the Morlocks moved closer to the Eloi's dwellings, prowling just beyond the edges of their makeshift homes. He understood then that the fear of the night was not a superstition, but a very real dread rooted in survival. The Eloi were not alone in this future world. They lived under the rule of the Morlocks, who emerged from their dark lairs at night to prey upon them, dragging the helpless Eloi into the depths of the earth. The realization struck the time traveler like a blow. Humanity had not evolved into a singular peaceful society, but had split into two distinct species. The gentle, passive Eloi, who lived on the surface, and the Morlocks, who dwelled underground and had become predators of the night. The Morlocks, though more savage, were the ones who truly controlled this world, feeding on the Eloi like cattle. As the days passed, the time traveler ventured cautiously into the tunnels that honeycombed the land. There, in the dark, he discovered a world of machinery and labor. The Morlocks lived in harsh conditions, working in a grim underworld where they maintained the machines that sustained both their lives and those of the Eloi. Their society was brutal, shaped by darkness and toil, and he understood that the Morlocks had adapted to this life, becoming creatures of survival and strength, in stark contrast to the helpless Eloi. The time traveler's heart ached as he realized the bitter irony of this future. Humanity's advancements had created a world of ease and comfort for some, but over time, this comfort had led to stagnation and decay. Society had divided into two extremes: the privileged Eloi, who had lost their will, and the oppressed Morlocks, who had grown fierce and relentless. It was a world shaped by the consequences of social division, and, in the end, the divisions had created two distinct dependent species, locked in a tragic cycle of life and death. The time traveler returned to the surface, his mind heavy with this revelation. He looked at the Eloi with new eyes, understanding their fear, their passivity, and the dark truth behind their existence. This was not the future he had hoped for. It was a vision of humanity's decline, a warning of the dangers of complacency and unchecked division. He knew now that his journey was far from over. There were still mysteries to uncover, and the time traveler resolved to venture deeper into this strange, tragic future, hoping to find answers, or perhaps redemption for the world he had left behind. Chapter 4. The Morlocks and the Dark Side of the Future. The time traveler had seen enough of the Eloi's world to understand its simplicity and fear. But he knew that to grasp the full truth, he had to confront the darker forces lurking beneath the surface. Determined to learn more about the Morlocks, he prepared himself to descend into the underground world from which they emerged each night. A world hidden from the sun and filled with secrets that spoke to the dark fate of human evolution. Equipped with a small torch fashioned from materials he found near the Eloi's dwellings, he ventured out at dusk. The Eloi watched him with wide eyes, their faces pale with a mix of fear and incomprehension. None of them dared to follow. To them, the tunnels were a place of nightmares, a territory of shadows and terror. The time traveler steeled himself, knowing that what lay ahead would be unlike anything he had ever experienced. He found an entrance to the Morlocks world, a dark, yawning hole set into the hillside, partially obscured by creeping vines and overgrown brush. As he lowered himself into the tunnel, a damp, stale odor filled his nostrils, and the sounds of the surface faded away. The walls closed in around him, and the torch's flickering light cast eerie shadows that danced along the rough, uneven surfaces. The descent felt endless, a journey into the bowels of the earth, where light and life as he knew them ceased to exist. Finally, he reached the bottom of the tunnel, and the world of the Morlocks unfolded before him. He stood in a vast underground chamber, dimly illuminated by strange phosphorescent lights that cast a sickly glow over everything. The walls were carved from solid rock, with crude markings and worn machinery scattered about, remnants of a civilization that had once been vibrant but had decayed over countless ages. The sound of clanging metal and the hum of machinery filled the air, a haunting symphony of toil and survival. As he moved cautiously through the chamber, he caught sight of the Morlocks. They were pale, with large, almost luminescent eyes adapted to the darkness, their movements quick and animalistic. They wore no clothing, and their skin, thin and translucent, seemed to absorb the faint light around them. They scurried from place to place, maintaining the ancient machines that still clanked and whirred, powering some unseen function of their world. He watched them in silence, a mixture of pity and horror welling within him. The time traveler realized with a chill that these machines were not just relics. They were part of a system that sustained both the Morlocks and the Eloi. The Morlocks had inherited the remnants of an industrial society, a world that had once belonged to humankind but had evolved into a starkly divided dystopia. They kept the machines running, providing the Eloi with their needs above ground, but they had also become the predators of the Eloi, feeding on them in a twisted cycle of dependency and horror. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. This future was the result of millennia of social division and economic disparity. What had once been classes of wealth and poverty had, over time, evolved into two separate species: the Eloi, the passive descendants of a society that had grown complacent in comfort, and the Morlocks, the oppressed and hardened survivors forced into the shadows. The Morlocks had not only adapted to their dark environment, but had become the ultimate manifestation of survival in harsh conditions. And now they preyed upon those who had once ruled over them. As he moved deeper into the tunnels, he stumbled upon a vast chamber filled with machinery, its gears grinding and pistons pumping, operated by Morlocks who moved like parts of the machines themselves. The machines seemed purposeless to him, vestiges of an era when humanity had been bound to industry and consumption. The Morlocks had no need for the luxuries or conveniences the machines had once provided, yet they kept them running as if by instinct, bound to the machinery as surely as it was bound to them. Suddenly, the time traveler heard a soft, eerie whispering sound from behind him. He turned, his torch casting a faint glow over a group of Morlocks who had crept closer, their eyes fixed on him with a chilling hunger. He took a step back, his heart pounding. They moved with uncanny silence, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. In that moment, he realized that he was in grave danger, an intruder in their domain, an outsider who did not belong. Gripping his torch tightly, he backed away, searching for a way out. The Morlocks, sensing his fear, began to close in, their movements quick and relentless. He felt a surge of panic, knowing that he could not hope to fend them off in the dark, confined space. With a burst of determination, he turned and sprinted through the tunnels, the eerie glow of the Morlock's eyes chasing him through the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, he found the shaft leading back to the surface and scrambled up, his hands slipping on the rough stones. As he climbed, he felt the Morlock's cold fingers brush against his ankles, their grasp almost pulling him back into the darkness. With a final, desperate effort, he pulled himself out of the tunnel and into the open air. The time traveler collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath, his body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The cool night air filled his lungs, and the stars above seemed impossibly bright after the stifling darkness of the Morlock's world. He had escaped, but the memory of what he had seen, of the creatures he had encountered, would haunt him. As he looked at the Eloi's sleeping dwellings, he felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and horror. This was the future that humanity had created, a world where civilization had split into two extremes, each dependent upon the other in a cycle of survival and destruction. The Eloi and the Morlocks were both prisoners of their past, bound to an existence shaped by the choices and divisions of a distant era. The time traveler knew then that his journey was not over. He had seen a glimpse of humanity's decline, but he resolved to travel further, to explore even more distant futures, and perhaps discover if there was hope beyond the darkness. With renewed purpose, he made his way back to the time machine, ready to continue his journey through the vast corridors of time. Chapter 5. The Search for the Time Machine. The time traveler's return from the Morlock's underground world left him shaken and resolute. The peaceful valley where the Eloi lived had been transformed in his mind from an idyllic paradise to a setting marked by horror and division. He knew now that his time machine, his only means of returning to his own time, had been taken by the Morlocks and hidden somewhere within their dark tunnels. Without it, he was trapped in this strange and terrifying future. Days passed as he searched for clues to the whereabouts of his machine. He wandered among the Eloi, hoping to find some information or a hint about the Morlock's lair. However, the Eloi were of little help. Their passive nature made them uninterested in his plight, and their fear of the Morlocks made them unwilling to approach the entrances to the underground tunnels. The time traveler found himself growing frustrated and weary, battling not only his fears, but the sense of isolation that weighed heavily on him. One evening, as dusk fell over the valley, he made a decision. He would venture into the Morlock's world again, this time prepared to confront them. Armed with a makeshift torch and a small metal rod he had fashioned into a weapon, he approached the dark mouth of the tunnel he had descended into before. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel his heart pounding as he prepared to step into the shadows once more. With the torch blazing ahead of him, he descended into the tunnel, moving carefully and quietly. The air grew colder, and the faint mechanical hum of machinery filled his ears as he made his way deeper. He knew the Morlocks were watching, their pale eyes hidden in the darkness, waiting for the moment to strike. But he was determined, focusing only on one thought: finding his time machine and escaping this world. As he explored the labyrinth of tunnels, he noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols and scratches that seemed to serve as guides or warnings. He followed them, hoping they would lead him to the central chamber where the Morlocks might have hidden his machine. The darkness pressed in around him, broken only by the flickering light of his torch, and the smell of damp earth filled his nostrils. Finally, after what felt like hours of navigating the maze-like passages, he stumbled upon a large chamber filled with machinery and gears, all ancient and corroded, but still functional. At the far end of the room, partially concealed by metal and shadow, he caught a glimpse of his time machine. Relief flooded him, but it was quickly replaced by fear as he realized that the Morlocks had anticipated his arrival. The creatures emerged from the shadows, their pale faces expressionless, their movements silent and precise. They encircled him, cutting off his path to the machine. The time traveler felt his pulse quicken, his mind racing as he tried to think of a way to reach his machine. He held up the torch, waving it back and forth, and the Morlocks shrank back from the light, their eyes squinting against the brightness. Seizing the opportunity, he lunged forward, pushing through the circle of Morlocks and sprinting toward the machine. His torch flickered dangerously, the flame growing dimmer as he fought to reach the device. He climbed onto the time machine, frantically adjusting the levers and dials as the Morlocks closed in around him. With a final, desperate motion, he pushed the lever forward, feeling the machine shudder and lurch beneath him. The world around him began to blur, the figures of the Morlocks dissolving into streaks of gray as the machine accelerated through time. He felt a surge of relief mixed with exhaustion as the machine carried him away from the terrifying world of the Eloi and Morlocks. He was free, escaping the nightmarish future that had nearly claimed him. As he traveled forward in time, he watched the changing landscape, his thoughts racing as he tried to process all he had seen. The divided society of the Eloi and Morlocks, the eerie beauty of the distant future, and the grim reality of humanity's fate weighed heavily on him. He knew that he had glimpsed something important, an evolution shaped by choices and divisions that had spiraled beyond control. But his journey was not yet over. He adjusted the controls, determined to venture further, to see what lay beyond this strange era. He wanted to find a world where humanity's spirit had survived, where hope and progress had prevailed. The time traveler braced himself, knowing that the future still held many mysteries, and prepared to face whatever awaited him on his journey through the vast corridors of time. Chapter 6. The Dying Earth, a Glimpse into the Far Future. The time traveler, now safely seated in his machine, adjusted the controls to propel himself further forward. The eerie world of the Eloi and Morlocks had vanished, but the images lingered in his mind, a vision of humanity's decline, split between two extremes, locked in a cycle of dependence and darkness. Determined to see what lay even further ahead, he pushed the lever forward, propelling himself into the unknown reaches of time. As the machine accelerated, the landscape blurred once more. Days, then years, then centuries passed in a heartbeat. The sun flickered, moving across the sky in rapid arcs as the Earth's rotation grew slower and the passage of time altered. Mountains rose and crumbled, rivers shifted, and the lush greenery of Earth transformed, replaced by arid stretches and unfamiliar formations. The world beneath him was evolving at an astonishing pace, morphing into something unrecognizable with each passing moment. After what felt like hours, the time traveler began to slow the machine, stopping in a distant era where he sensed something profoundly different. He stepped out, feeling the chill of the air, a thin, cold atmosphere that tasted metallic, devoid of the life-giving vibrancy he knew. The sun hung low on the horizon, a faint red disk in the darkened sky, casting a dim, almost ghostly light over the landscape. This was not the warm, yellow sun he knew, but a dying star, nearing the end of its lifespan, offering only a feeble warmth. He gazed around, taking in the strange world before him. The earth had transformed into a vast, barren expanse, silent and hauntingly still. The lush forests, rivers, and mountains of his own time had vanished, replaced by desolate plains of stone and sand, stretching endlessly beneath the cold, reddish glow of the sun. The seas had receded, leaving behind wide, dry basins, and the air felt thin, making each breath an effort. Life as he had known it seemed absent, and the weight of solitude pressed down on him. He wandered the empty landscape, his footsteps echoing faintly in the vast silence. In the distance, he saw strange, dark shapes. Plants of some kind, twisted and sparse, clinging to the ground in patches. These were not the green, thriving plants of his own time, but brittle, thorny growths, adapted to survive in this harsh, dying world. The sight filled him with both awe and sadness. These plants were among the last remnants of life, clinging stubbornly to existence even as the world around them faded. As he moved further across the landscape, he spotted faint, sluggish movements near the edge of a dried basin. Curious, he approached, peering into the gloom. There, he saw creatures unlike any he had ever imagined. Slow-moving, limbless beings with leathery skin, sluggishly making their way across the rocky ground. They were adapted to this barren future, surviving on minimal resources, but their forms were primitive, stripped down to the bare essentials for survival. It was as if life itself had regressed, simplified into creatures that existed only to persist, not to thrive or evolve. The time traveler felt a profound sorrow as he watched them, realizing that the spark of intelligence, creativity, and ambition that had once driven humanity had long since faded. This was a world reduced to the most basic struggle for survival, where life clung to existence in the face of inevitable extinction. He wondered if this was the final chapter for Earth, a slow descent into darkness, a long, quiet fade into oblivion. He gazed up at the sky, where the stars had grown faint, almost swallowed by the dimming light of the sun. The once bright constellations were barely visible, overshadowed by the encroaching darkness of space. The sun itself seemed to pulse weakly, a dying heart struggling against the inevitable. The time traveler realized with a heavy heart that he was witnessing the end of Earth as a living world, the final stages of a planet that had once teemed with life and wonder. Driven by a mix of horror and fascination, he returned to his machine, setting the controls to push him further still, to the very edge of time. As the machine surged forward, the last traces of life disappeared, and the earth grew colder, darker, and more alien. The sun shrank into a mere point of light, barely distinguishable from the other stars, until it finally blinked out, leaving the earth in complete darkness. He stopped the machine, stepping out onto a world locked in eternal night. The silence was absolute, a stillness so profound that it felt as though time itself had ceased. There was no movement, no sound, only the cold, lifeless surface of a planet abandoned by even the most resilient forms of life. The air was thin and icy, barely breathable, and he felt the chill seep into his bones. The sky above was a vast, empty expanse, dotted with faint stars that offered no warmth, no hope. He understood then that he was standing on a world that had reached its end. Earth was now a frozen, silent shell, circling a dead star, lost in the vast emptiness of space. The journey through time had brought him not to a vision of progress or advancement, but to the inevitable decay that awaited all things. With a heavy heart, he climbed back into the time machine, understanding now the full weight of what he had seen. Time was an endless river, carrying all things with it toward the unknown, but its ultimate destination was a place of stillness and silence, a world where even the brightest dreams and greatest achievements would fade into darkness. He set the controls, prepared to return to his own time, his mind filled with both wonder and sadness, knowing that he had glimpsed the final chapters of Earth's story. Chapter 7. Return and Revelation. With a deep breath, the time traveler adjusted the controls of his machine, setting his sights on his own era. He had journeyed farther than he ever imagined possible, witnessing Earth's rise, decline, and eventual silence. His mind was burdened with the images of the Eloi and Morlocks, the desolate plains of the dying Earth, and the cold, dark world that awaited in the end. The machine began its journey back, and the landscape shifted once again, reversing the endless march of time. As he sped backward, the Earth's surface came alive with color and movement. The withered, silent landscape bloomed once more. The red, dying sun transformed into the golden orb he knew. Cities reappeared, mountains rose and fell, civilizations rebuilt and faded in the blink of an eye. The familiar world of Victorian England came back into focus, and he felt a strange mixture of relief and dread as the time machine slowed, finally coming to a stop in the dim, quiet room from which he had departed. He stepped out of the machine, his legs unsteady, and his mind struggling to adjust to the familiar surroundings. The air was thick with the scent of dust and oil, the ticking of a nearby clock marking the return to his own time. He felt disoriented, as though he had aged lifetimes in a single journey. But he knew that he had returned to share what he had seen, to warn and enlighten those who still had the power to shape the future. As he gathered his composure, he heard voices and laughter coming from the next room. His guests had returned, unaware of the journey he had taken and the incredible distance he had traveled. He opened the door and they looked up in surprise, their expressions shifting from amusement to curiosity as they noticed his weary, haunted look. The time traveler's clothes were dusty, his face pale, and his eyes held a faraway gaze. The guests exchanged puzzled glances as he seated himself, his voice low and steady. "I have returned," he said, "from a journey beyond your comprehension, into the very heart of time itself." His friends listened, some with amusement, others with cautious interest. They were accustomed to his eccentricities, but they could see that tonight something was different. There was an intensity in his manner, a gravity that silenced their doubts. He began his tale, recounting each step of his journey: the construction of the time machine, the plunge into the unknown, and his arrival in the world of the Eloi and Morlocks. He described the childlike Eloi, their peaceful yet vacant lives, and the terrifying presence of the Morlocks, whose predatory existence was a dark reflection of the world above. He spoke of the tragic division that had led humanity down a path of irreversible separation, evolving into two distinct races, each locked in a cycle of dependence and fear. As he shared these revelations, his guests shifted uncomfortably, their skepticism giving way to a quiet unease. The time traveler's words were filled with vivid detail, each description resonating with a strange authenticity that left them at a loss for words. He continued, describing his descent into the tunnels of the Morlocks, the chilling sight of his time machine hidden in the depths, and his narrow escape back to the surface. The guests listened in rapt silence, unable to dismiss his account as mere fantasy. But it was the final leg of his journey that left them truly shaken. He spoke of the dying earth, the fading sun, and the vast empty plains where only the most primitive forms of life clung to existence. He described the suffocating silence, the thin, icy air, and the sense of utter solitude as he stood on a world nearing its end. The guests glanced at one another, a sense of dread settling over them as they imagined the desolate future he had painted, a vision of earth abandoned, lost in the vast darkness of time. When he finished, silence hung heavy in the room. His friends shifted uneasily, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. They were reluctant to accept such a grim vision of the future, yet the time traveler's conviction was undeniable. His story had an intensity, a truth that resonated deep within them, even as their minds struggled to reconcile it with their own understanding of the world. One of his guests, a skeptic by nature, finally spoke, attempting to laugh it off as a vivid dream or an elaborate tale. But the time traveler's eyes met his with a steely gaze. "Believe what you will," he said quietly, "but know that what I have seen is as real as the ground beneath your feet. The future is not a distant fantasy. It is shaped by our actions, our choices, and the divisions we create." The others sat in thoughtful silence, contemplating the implications of his journey. For the time traveler, the experience had changed him irrevocably. He understood that humanity's path was not set in stone, that there was still time to learn from the mistakes he had seen play out across millennia. The image of the Morlocks and Eloi haunted him, a reminder of the consequences of unchecked division, of a society that valued comfort over growth, and of the inevitable decline that awaited without change. The evening drew to a close, and one by one his guests left, each carrying a lingering sense of awe and unease. The time traveler remained in his study, staring at the time machine, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He knew that his journey was far from over, that there were still questions left unanswered, mysteries yet to be uncovered. The vision of Earth's end lingered in his mind, a haunting reminder of time's relentless march. In the days that followed, he grew restless, his thoughts consumed by the journey he had taken and the truths he had uncovered. The call of the unknown beckoned him once more, and he found himself drawn to the time machine, feeling the pull of the mysteries that still lay hidden in the folds of time. And so, one evening, he vanished, leaving behind only the faint hum of the machine and the silence of an empty room. The time traveler's fate remained a mystery, his final journey lost to the depths of time. But his story endured, passed down as both a warning and an inspiration, a reminder of humanity's power to shape its own future and the need for vigilance against the forces that could divide and diminish it. His legacy was not merely a tale of adventure, but a vision of hope and caution, urging those who followed to seek knowledge, to grow, and to guard against complacency. For time, as he had shown, waits for no one.